you do when your heart is broken?
Cry.
Thought number
Yeah.
2,
Go to bed.
are there
Go to bed,
situations in which you do not need to forgive?
No.
Okay, we start out with
We're done, okay, is it
Matthew,
over now? Oh.
Matthew 5, verses 1 through 12. And I'm sure that none of you have ever heard this passage
Oh, yeah, I'm
from
sure you
Scripture.
have it.
Now, when he saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who hunger. Blessed are the merciful, the pure in heart, the peacemakers. And he finishes by saying, Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice, be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. We all know the Beatitudes. You know what? I think it's unavoidable. At different points in our lives, we're going to experience heartbreak. It's part of life. It's going to happen. And it manifests itself in sadness, sorrow, grief, disappointment, and a whole lot of other things we could probably bring up. Hi. It's not an AA meeting, but there's a couple of us that might benefit from it. A broken heart is a really heavy, suffocating blanket to carry around and endure. But it's just simply an act of life. Be that as it may, and even though, what did I say? Was it me?
You broke his heart, honey, whatever it was.
Yeah,
Be
follow
that as it
the
may,
outline.
I believe that we do, however, need help in knowing how to deal with it. We need help working our way through it. And we need help in learning how to grow from the experience of it. Well, first of all, what are some of the things that break hearts?
Your kids.
Yeah. You're not kidding.
Betrayal.
Betrayal.
Politicians.
Well, yeah, I guess so.
I never get that engaged with them that they can break my heart.
No, no.
It's things you care about that go wrong.
And sometimes I think romance, you can get a horrible broken heart in romance. I mean, in a relationship with someone that doesn't pan out.
Any relationship that embodies heart, or embodies a betrayal,
Right.
it can be a heartbreaking experience. Parents whose children go astray and turn their back on them. Sons or daughters who marry, and then the daughter-in-law or son-in-law are vicious to the parents and don't become part of the family. You know, all these kinds of
Illness
things.
of people you care about can cause heartbreak.
That's exactly true.
Or the loss of a loved one.
Yeah.
Yeah, loss of loved ones.
So, I think it would be fair to say that because of the fact that we embrace the Christian faith, we're fortunate in this kind of a situation, because there are special resources in the Christian faith that can bring healing to the hurt heart and help in times of sorrow. So James Moore says there are 3 things that we should be willing to claim. And the first is claim the fellowship of the church. I'm sorry that Che isn't here, because I know she would be wanting to respond to that.
Yeah.
And maybe the rest of you might as well. Let the church family surround you and support you. It's not an imposition. It's what they want to do. You know that. We've all been there. Let the combination of prayers and hugs, handshakes, letters, and cards, and phone calls, and casseroles.
Dinners, yeah.
Let those things be the means by which you can find strength in a time of heartbreak. Let worship services with your church family be a celebration of faith and a reminder to you that no matter how hurt and alone you might feel, you are never alone at all. God is with you, your church family is there for you, and most of these folks in the church family have experienced heartbreak as well, and therefore they can empathize, not sympathize, empathize. Empathy is a whole lot more important than sympathy. If you feel sorry for somebody, that doesn't help anything. If you have empathy for people, you're experiencing it with them, and that's critically important. So there's one small piece of advice here, and that is, no matter how painful your experience may be, come back to the regular church participation as soon as you can. Let the church be a major component in the healing process. I don't want to talk out of shop on Shay, but Shay lost her husband. Of course, the church immediately swarmed her with support and love and care. And the very next Sunday, she was back in church. And James Moore says that's important to do that. Sometimes people don't return to church. And what they say is, what they say is, well, I just can't do it. You know, my wife and I came to this church every Sunday for 25 years. And now she's gone and I just can't bring myself to come alone. It's just too painful. That kind of thing. You know, James says, don't do that. Don't do that. You need to get back involved in the church as fast as you can and as actively as you can, because that's part of the healing process. You're denying yourself part of the healing process. He says the second thing, claim the power of helping others. This is something that comes only after having gone through the grief and heartbreak yourself. Hello.
Oh, sure.
This is stranger in short hair.
Because you've been through this yourself, you now have an empathy, you now have a sensitivity, you now have a new compassion and a new power to be able to help other people get through their grief journey. When we're young and we haven't experienced this kind of thing, you know, we don't know what it's all about, we don't know what to do. Once you've been down that road a few times, let me tell you, and I know I've been through the same experiences that you guys all have during your lifetimes. And one night I received a phone call at 2 o'clock in the morning
From Faith.
from Faith. Dennis had just passed away. Suddenly, unexpectedly, totally unbelievable. And she called me at 2 in the morning and said, I need you.
What can I do?
Oh, please. And so we immediately got up and went to the hospital in Vegas. And we sat with her for, about 3 hours, 3 or 4 hours.
Until the coroner came.
Until the coroner came with Dennis laying there. And she was just sobbing. I've never heard anybody sob and cry like she was just absolutely destroyed. And having been through this kind of thing with people, I was able to, I prayed with her, and we were able to just sit with her, and I sat for the better part of 2 hours, just sat next to her and my arm around her. Didn't say anything, just sat there. And you know, you become sensitized, and you become able to do things like that when maybe 10, 15 years ago, I wouldn't have had any idea in the world what to do. I would have been a nervous wreck. I might even have said, I'm not going. I can't do this. But you get to the point where you can do things like that because you've been there.
I think an important thing about that with anybody whose heart is broken is that people are afraid they're gonna say the wrong thing to that person. So sometimes they ignore that person, and you really, no, nothing you say is the wrong thing. And sometimes you don't need to say anything. You just need to wrap your arms around them and let them know you're there. But I think a lot of people are afraid of encountering this kind of a situation. And I think it's very important to say something. When David was born, our second child, it was a cleft lip. Only one of my friends called me at the hospital because none of them knew what to say to me.
Yeah.
And that was extremely lonely because both of our kids, of course, were born with birth defects. But I learned a big lesson from there. They didn't have to say anything. And I think silence sometimes, if you don't say anything, is making their heart break more.
Worse.
Sometimes I think
Yeah.
it's better,
Yeah.
because sometimes what people say
Just hug them.
is totally wrong.
Yeah.
You
But
know,
even so, I
somebody
think when it
just-
is, I think,
You know, their
People
house is
understand.
burned down, and their pet dog died in the fire, and they have a child in the hospital with smoke inhalation. Oh, I'm so sorry, but you know, into every life.
little rain must fall.
And, you know,
Yeah, right.
you just gotta be careful. So, first of all, he says, claim the fellowship of the church, and then claim the power that you have, the ability to help other people who are going through the period of mourning. In the Beatitudes, Jesus said, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. The word comforted is from the Latin comfortus, meaning with strength. So if you use the word that way, what Jesus said is, blessed are those who have gone through sorrow, for they are with strength. Okay? So any one of us who's learned through personal experience what pain and anxiety are really like, we no longer belong to ourselves. Okay? We have become a lot more than that. We have become capable of being a brother or a sister and a friend to all others who have suffered. And then third, he says, claim the presence of God. The really good news of our faith, guess what? God continues to be with us in any and all circumstances, always. In Matthew's Gospel, he uses the word Emmanuel, and the meaning of the word is God with us. And that was Matthew's way of trying to capture the meaning of Jesus. God is with us and God is for us. Jim tells a story of a few years ago. He said his brother Bob, also a minister, no surprise, a minister in Tennessee, sent him a copy of one of his sermons, and it included the touching story of a young man whose wife had died, leaving him with a small boy. Back home from the cemetery after the funeral, they went to bed as soon as dark came because he couldn't think of anything else that he could bear to do. So he just decided to go to bed. And as he lay there in the darkness, brokenhearted, grief-stricken, numb with sorrow, the little boy broke the stillness from his little bed with a disturbing question. Daddy, where is Mommy? Well, the father tried to get the boy to go to sleep. The questions kept coming from the little boy's confused mind. And after a while, the father got up and brought the little boy to bed with him. But the child was still disturbed and restless, and occasionally would ask another probing, heartbreaking question. Finally, a little later in the night, the boy reached out his hand through the darkness and placed it on his father's face. And he said, Daddy, is your face towards me? Assured verbally and by his own touch that his father's face was indeed turned toward him, the little boy said, if your face is toward me, I think I can go to sleep. And in a little while he was quiet. The father lay there in the darkness, and in childlike faith he lifted up his own needy heart to his Father in heaven and prayed something like this. Oh God, the way is dark, and I confess that I do not see my way through. But if your face is toward me, somehow I think I can So, in times of brokenheartedness, claim the fellowship of the church, claim the power that you have to help and heal others, and claim God's presence. Thought number 2, should we always forgive? A certain writer once shared a truth he had learned on a trip to Yellowstone National Park. Anybody here ever been to Yellowstone National Park? Ah, what a place. A ranger took him to a clearing where grizzly bears were fed. I wish they would have done that when we went there, because we saw everything but a bear, and my wife has always wanted to see a bear.
That was like our picnic.
The only thing she's ever seen is a bear fox. As they watched the grizzlies eating, the ranger talked about how powerful the grizzly bear is. He said the grizzly bear can whip any animal in the West, with the possible exception of a buffalo or the Kodiak bear. Not long after the ranger had made that statement, the writer noticed something that really fascinated him. All the other animals gave way to the grizzly. As the grizzly came along, I mean, all the other animals moved aside, they got out of the way, they took off in the other direction, except for one. One small, furry little animal, confident and unafraid, stood right there while the huge bear went around. The grizzly never even attempted to challenge him. Now that fearless animal was not a buffalo. It was not a Kodiak bear. What was it?
Or a squirrel or a
skunk.
It was a
skunk.
little skunk. Yeah. Of course, the grizzly could have easily won in a fight with the skunk. I mean, he could have crushed the life out of the skunk with one paw, just boom. But the grizzly didn't
Anything that smelled like.
touch the skunk. Why?
Because he smells bad, or you have,
Because he knew he'd be too high of a price to pay, and that's a smart grizzly bear. What has that story got to do with forgiveness?
You have to forgive, because otherwise it's too high of a price to pay.
In what regards?
yourself.
Well, you're gonna face God at some point in your death.
It's like I told the kids last week, I do not, for even a split second, relish the idea of standing before God in judgment. It's a good thing that Jesus offers to stand there and defend me. If it wasn't for that, I'd be upset the rest of my life. It all has to do with paying the price. The price is too high. When other people have offended us, or hurt us, or done something mean or cruel to us, it might be a person that we could very easily get revenge against. It might be a person that we could easily eliminate, get rid of, but the price is way too high. The price is way too high. What makes forgiveness so hard for people?
Well, I think when
Your
somebody
own-
really hurts you or does things that really upset you, you dwell on that all the time. You dwell on what they've done to you, which is probably right. And sometimes I think it's difficult to eventually forgive them because you really almost wish damage to them or some sort to get them away from you or out of your life or something. But it's you that's getting all this turmoil inside. They don't care. They don't
And I think
care.
it's placing too much importance on yourself.
Yeah, that's right. That's
You
what
know,
I mean.
you're
It just-
thinking that you matter more than that person, or your feelings matter more, or whatever.
Well, I think as human beings, I mean, that's a natural thing. If we're offended or hurt in some way, we get angry, we want to get even, we want to hurt back, and that's all knee-jerk reaction stuff. But grizzly bear was smart. The price was too high. That old grizzly bear was a lot smarter than a lot of people. A lot of people spend weary days and sleepless nights brooding over resentments, calculating ways to get even, demanding our pound of flesh, seething over grievances, wallowing in our self-pity, unbending, refusing to give mercy, being totally unable to forgive, let alone forget. There's a story about a man who had begun to think about getting a divorce from his wife. So he went to a lawyer to talk about his marital problems. And after telling his story, he asked the lawyer, what's the best thing I should do? The lawyer told him, look, the best thing you can do, go home, go back to your wife, apologize to her, pledge her your love, and make the marriage work. That's the best thing you can do. The man was quiet for a bit, and then he said, what's the next best thing? It's a sad fact of modern human life. Broken relationships, hostility, violence are a sickness. It's a sickness in the world. And it's a sickness that reduces the quality and meaning of life for everybody involved. You think about this, as human beings, we're a huge bundle of contradictions. On the one hand, we all need each other, and we know it. We know we need each other. And most people really try to get along. But bad communication gets all garbled. There's misunderstandings, suspicions creep in, and we end up hurting and frustrating one another instead, even when we know that we need each other. So resentment and anger and jealousy and selfishness seem to poison us, and we end up saying and doing things that break hearts. Or we treat each other with cold indifference. We make ourselves remote and inaccessible. Good heavens, it's no wonder that one of Jesus' most prominent emphasis centered on forgiveness. Let's face it, no marriage, no friendship, no family, no church, no society can survive without forgiveness. It just can't work. And by the way, if you want to know what the scripture lesson was for this thought, guess what? Try Luke 23, 25 through 28.
The Lord's Prayer?
No, it's,
No, ma'am.
77.
As they led him away, they seized Simon from Cyrene, who found his way in the country, put the cross on him, and made it carried to the hill. 2 other men, both criminals, were also led out with him to be executed. And when they came to the place called the Skull, there they crucified him, along with the criminals, one on his right and the other on his left. And Jesus said, Father,
forgive them.
forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. And the rest of the story of the Passion of Christ. Listen to these lessons from Jesus' teaching. These are paraphrased, but you can guess. A cruel word can never be retracted. Revenge is never sweet, but ultimately becomes a sour stomach and a bitter memory. Violence only breeds more violence. Hate poisons the soul. Jesus' primary focus was on forgiveness. So, what do we do instead?
Forgive. Or
Yes,
forget.
but how do we do that? What kinds of things can we do to be a forgiving person?
You have to ask for help.
And we're asking who?
Jesus.
Okay? Pray? gave some very specific recommendations on this. Be a bridge builder. Create roads and connections between people. Be peacemakers. Tear down walls that separate people. And most of all, don't only seek forgiveness, but offer it. I got into a discussion with somebody one time about this. It seems to me, this is my own personal opinion, it seems to me that Jesus' whole life was spent tearing down walls. It seems to me what Jesus was really all about. Walls that separated Jew and Gentile, for example. Walls that separated men and women. Walls that separated the Jews and the Samaritans. And I'm sure if Jesus were alive today, he would continue to do that by tearing down the walls that separate people today. Walls of race, nationality, creed, sexual orientation. Jesus was all about tearing down walls and connecting people. This was a key theme in the parables that Jesus taught. It was the dominant focus in the Sermon on the Mount, and I think it was the primary purpose of his entire life. If you should ever wonder whether you should forgive a person who has hurt or offended you in some way, go to the Bible, open up Matthew chapter 23, verses, 28 through whatever it was, and reread the story of Jesus on the cross. The bottom line is a quote from a person whose name I don't have. But it goes like this: forgiveness is not only mankind's deepest need, but humanity's highest achievement. Not only mankind's deepest need, but humanity's highest achievement. Which, in my mind, underscores how difficult it is to be forgiving. If forgiveness is man's highest achievement, just think of how much it takes to achieve something that high. People often get confused between forgiveness and persons not having to answer for what they've done. A person who's committed a crime needs to be held responsible and needs to face the penalty. That does not have anything to do with forgiving a person, because the act of forgiveness is an act that goes on inside you. And I've mentioned a couple times before, watching TV, how a mother can stand up in court, face the man who has murdered her son, and said, "I forgive you." It blows people away because they don't understand how that works. They don't understand what forgiveness really is. That mother is offering a relief to that person, whether he accepts it or not is his choice, but she is also purging herself, cleansing herself of the pain and the hate and the anger. So people say, "I don't know how she'd stand and do a thing like that. If it was me, I'd say, I hope you roast in hell forever." You see people do that too, you know. And you say, boy, you know, you're going to spend the rest of your life eating yourself alive inside, burning yourself up inside over this, when you have the opportunity here to escape all of that and get it out, get the poison out of your system.
I think some people are afraid if they do that, somehow they condone it, you know.
Yeah, and
Or that they're asked to forget. I mean, that whole forgive and forget, you will never, something like that, you never forget.
no, you can't.
I
You
mean,
can't.
and you shouldn't forget.
And in the scriptures, we're led to believe that God forgives and forgets. So maybe that's only a God characteristic, a God quality. I don't think it's a human quality. Now, some of us getting to be the age that we are, forget things. And
Something
maybe,
different.
maybe we can accomplish that.
Thing.
Anyway,
Somehow.
Yeah, God might take care of it for us.
yes, maybe. Okay, next week, I believe our two thoughts for next week. What do you do when it's hard to believe? And talking a good game is not enough.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Brian.
Mhm.